You're watching Force 13's live streaming service. Now, just to show you how impromptu tonight's Tropical Weather Bulletin live is, we've not started with any music, would you believe? So you're left with this drab atmosphere with myself here, and what you can see on the screen straight away is Tropical Storm Nana. Also, Tropical Storm Omar off the US East Coast. Both of these became named storms today. I was woefully unprepared for this live stream tonight, but we do have a team who will help me out in a whole as usual. We're joined by Strat, Amy, David, Hayden, Lucas, and Samuel. Good evening to you all, and welcome to the Tropical Weather Bulletin.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Looking on our screen right now is a wide shot of the Atlantic Ocean, and you can see Nana, as pointed out, southwest of Jamaica, and you've got several other little disturbances out there in the Atlantic. So who wants to kick us off tonight?
I will. So,
Okay.
our latest advisory from the National Hurricane Center that Nana is located at 16.8 degrees north, 79.3 degrees west. It has 50-mile-an-hour winds and a pressure of 1,002 millibars, and it is expected to become a hurricane by 2 a.m. on Thursday.
Yeah, I will say, though, there is some speculation, and we're going to have recon come in soon to confirm it, that the storm might be a bit stronger than 50 miles an hour already. We're going to definitely have to see the full, data update with the recon pass, but a very compact and pretty well-organized system already for a storm that wasn't even designated as a potential tropical cyclone until just about 9 hours ago.
Yeah, and at that time, it basically Recon already found that they went straight to a tropical storm for Nana, which would have otherwise been Tropical Depression 16. And quite frankly, we were kind of not expecting Nana to form this quickly.
So on the forecast track, which Strat is showing us there, you can see calling for hurricane landfall in Belize on Thursday morning. So a hurricane watch out there already. Could even be upgraded to a warning when it gets closer.
Yeah, I mean, if they're expecting this to become a hurricane, you'll probably see that be upgraded to a warning probably within the next 12 to 18 hours at most. Even if it ends up becoming just shy of a hurricane when it makes landfall, they might end up just keeping it as a warning anyways. What's going to be most interesting to see if they try to upgrade it sooner, if recon data comes in and tries to say the storm is stronger than what the 50-mile-an-hour thing right now is saying. Just because SFMR readings a bit earlier were a bit high, flight level winds were a bit high for a storm that you would see just designated as a tropical storm. Some of those were getting up towards 60 knots. So it's going to be interesting to see if that trends continue with intensification. And the recon plane right now is about maybe an hour or 2 hours at most away from an actual pass at the center. So it is possible that we'll get a full data review of the current conditions of the storm during the stream tonight.
Yeah, and I'd also touch up on what Strat mentioned with when these warnings will be issued. The current watches and warnings in effect in accordance with the latest advisory at 8 p.m. We do have a hurricane watch in effect for the entire coast of Belize with a tropical storm warning in effect from the Yucatan, Mexico, from Puerto Costa Maya to Chetumal, as well as the entire coast of Belize that may get upgraded for Belize later. Tropical storm watch is also in effect for the northern coast of Honduras, stretching from Puerto Patica westward to the Guatemala border, Roatan Island and the Bay Islands of Honduras, as well as the Caribbean Sea coast of Guatemala.
And got some imagery here, actually. Not Isaias, that's on the image there. No, let's get that off. There it is. You can see how woefully occupied we're tonight. There is the storm Nana right now. You can just about make out the outline of Jamaica and Cuba to the northeast. And towards its southwest, just working on getting that on the screen, you'll see the outline of the coast of Honduras as well. Really blowing up some significant convection and questions about whether it was developing a primitive eye earlier today.
Yeah, well, we're going to get a full data pass soon. I actually saw a question in chat, and this kind of relates to it. Someone asking, could it rapidly intensify to something stronger than just a minimal hurricane before it makes landfall? Notably, despite its relatively impressive structure for a storm of its size, it really doesn't have a lot of time left. About 36 hours or so, probably a little bit less than that now, even. So a lot is really going to come down to what it's actually at right now in terms of how much further it can ramp up before it really gets too close to land. And smaller storms like this are, of course, prone to some increasing levels of fluctuation with intensity. So when it gets closer to land, if it ramps up pretty quickly, it could try to struggle a bit with dry air ingestion just off the shore of Central America. But for now, though, pretty impressive looking tropical storm.
Certainly is. There's the latest visible imagery there just before it went dark, and then the later imagery there after sunset. So it was really blowing up very interestingly on that. Of course, we can't go for too long without mentioning what's going on in the Western Pacific, and quite a lot is the answer. You can see this picture right now. This, I believe, is up to date. Let me just double check on that one. Just reloading that image there. This should definitely be up to date. There it is right now. So, Maysak still going strong. Latest we've heard from the ATCF is that it's still a Category 4. Probably not at this point. It's looking quite a bit weaker. I would still have it as a mid-range Category 3. Low pressure, still in the 930s at least, and probably quite a large wind field, and 78 million in the path, 10% chance of 50 knot winds, which is potentially destructive. So that's a lot of potential damage from this storm, which, if it does hold its intensity, would be one of the strongest to make landfall in South Korea.
Yeah, and I have the track up on it right now. Of course, JTWC is still saying Category 4, even though, it probably isn't anymore. But like you said, a lot of people under risk from this storm, and, not just the potential landfall in South Korea, which is very likely at this point, but impacts are going to reach out to the east as well. Kyushu in Japan is likely going to get at least some gale force winds in association with this, and they're already getting some outer bands too starting to reach out. I think the infrared does a good job at showing really that the actual structure of the storm, I don't know if you have infrared satellite imagery, but it really shows the structure of the storm is a lot more disheveled than yesterday. But it also goes to show that the impacts from it are already reaching out well away from the center of circulation. So this is a pretty large storm too.
See what we can do.
A lot of people under potential fire from it. I'll see if I can pull it up.
There we go.
Really
Worked some magic there. You can see the structure a little bit better now on the rainbow imagery here. And you can also see Tropical Storm High Shen, which is forming down there as well. Blowing up pretty nicely on that imagery. JTWC and JMA looking at this one closely, and that could be another major typhoon impact in just a few days.
Yeah, I'll see if I can pull up the track for that one too quickly. But they're saying potential 120 knots for this storm in particular, Haitian, pretty close to Kyushu as well. So the similar areas that are getting battered right now by some heavier rain bands and tropical storm force winds could be seeing very strong typhoon winds as we head into early next week and into this weekend.
Yeah.
And here's that 5-day chart from the JTWC. It could try to go a bit west and actually miss a direct landfall in Kyushu, but it is forecasted around day 4 right now before it really accelerates.
That has actually trended west a little bit.
Yeah, it was further east before. But it is
imagine though if South Korea in the crosshairs yet again on that one as well, and the enormous wind field that this one's expected to have pushes it towards CDPS stage 8.
Yeah, and that's on top of it still going to accelerate, pretty significantly in forward speed between days 4 and 5 on their forecast here. So you could see this storm as a powerful typhoon, not just for further reaches of the Ryukyu Islands, portions of Japan, but it could still be near Category 2 strength or at it when it makes a potential landfall in South Korea if you go just past day
Oh
5 on
yeah.
this chart as well. So a lot of southern South Korea has been under fire the past 2 weeks. You know, from Bavi just missing to the west for at least some of them to Maysak now about to make a powerful landfall, and this storm's coming up right behind it too.
Yeah, and South Korea alone could very well see a 1-2 punch from both Masak and Shen, which would be rather devastating for the country if the forecasts verify.
Let's just sum up the rest of the world then. This is the Eastern Pacific. Okay, that's about it for the Eastern Pacific. What else have we got? Oh, this is a look down in the South Pacific. Not much going on here. North Indian Ocean, quiet. And that's everything really. So it's the Atlantic and the Western Pacific that we are mainly watching. That's where the storms are. Nana and Omar. We'll get some imagery of Omar shortly, but it's hardly worth it because it looks dreadful. Any comments on that?
Omar's been looking like a giant trash heap, really, since its birth. I think that all of us have thought Omar never really looked good. It's just been sheared throughout its entire life, and you can see that rather clearly on visible and on infrared. The low-level circulation is exposed. I wouldn't be surprised if this becomes a post-tropical cyclone by tomorrow evening.
Yeah, and something to note about
that
it
late.
Something to note about is that this could be there was potential. It did seem to be a tropical depression for quite a while before it got named, but some sources suggest that it might have had tropical storm force winds in it before the NHC named it.
I mean, regardless, though, I think the only thing of notoriety with Omar is going to be that it's the earliest O-named storm on record, beating Ophelia of 2005 by about a week. I mean, fortunately,
did
it's
that
just heading out
update
to
go
sea.
out in the end that we were doing?
Yes, it did. So we had that video out.
The main reason doing that update really is to, well, if we'd like to do one update at least when something forms, just so that people are aware of it, but also that it is another record.
Yeah, I think the only really risk for it right now, if you're along portions of the eastern seaboard and Bermuda, just keep an eye out. And
is
Atlantic
if you're
Canada.
a fish.
Well, yeah, that too, but keep an eye out potentially for some rougher surf and some, maybe higher likelihood of rip currents over the next couple days as the system kind of moves out and really dies. But in terms of wind impacts and rain,
yeah, Bermuda might get a bit.
Neither place is really going to see too much. Bermuda could see a little bit of rain, but that's just because it's kind of almost on the tail end of a frontal system already. It looks like.
Yeah.
The actual center of circulation, though, is, while clearly visible, very sheared and not impressive in structure. In the past, some people might have just assumed it's a tropical depression, but they are using a mix of scatterometer data and Dvorak techniques to upgrade this to a tropical storm strength system.
I mean, the visible imagery, and you can see the shear of in the upper screen across your screen from left to right.
Yes, especially when you look further north there.
That's what it's about to walk into, and that's not going to help it at all.
In just a moment, I'm going to get some loops up for the Western Pacific. Do bear with me because, well, I did have 3 hours notice on this stream, but I decided to use none of it to prepare for the stream. And this should be some imagery. There it is. So that is Maysak right now. Still looking pretty decent on visible imagery, but a collapse of that eye wall that happened, and now it's sort of a new one, really. Thomas, what are your thoughts on Maysak?
Its appearance, Masak's appearance is looking, well, significantly worse than it was, especially at this time yesterday. I think we can definitely say it's safe to say that inner eye wall has completely and utterly degraded, and there's an outer eye wall that has formed here. It's kind of wrapping in. It almost kind of looks like a non-tropical entity with the banding features that you see there. But it obviously still is a tropical entity. I'm not suggesting that it's not, but it's looking like a storm which is actually, by models, probably deepening as it heads north and expanding with time. So your wind speeds are probably going to go down, but your wind field is going to get much larger, and it appears that's what's happening. So I wouldn't be shocked if we have a Category 3 120-mile-an-hour storm with the pressure in the 930s.
Right now, yeah, that's what we're running with, 120 miles an hour, 933 millibars on this storm. And pressure is no longer deepening because it's not strengthening, and the the progression north and the size increase is not offsetting, it's weakening, but it is weakening more slowly than you would expect in terms of pressure.
And the path of the storm for Maysak, at least, takes it basically through all of South Korea, at least in paths. It is expected right now, according to the JTWC, that all of mainland South Korea will at least experience gale force sustained winds. We were talking last night, and
Just to point out, a preliminary typhoon warning is in effect for the entirety of South Korea.
I mean, that really just goes to show the potential danger of the storm, because there's still some wiggle room in the country right now, including Seoul, even though it's significantly further north right now. And, I don't know if you have some imagery up right now on stream. I can see that.
Yep.
I think I was on the track for a second, but outer bands from the system already starting to reach Jeju, already impacting Kyushu, still impacting significant areas of the Ryukyu Islands right now. A very large system, and that really means that significant impacts are going to arrive to mainland South Korea well before the harshest winds in the actual center of the storm really get there. So this is going to be an ongoing situation in terms of very inclement conditions and life-threatening conditions potentially for a significant time period, even as the storm is well offshore still.
I'm not enormously familiar with the South Korean warning system, but I believe a typhoon warning proper. I reckon this preliminary typhoon warning is just like a typhoon watch, and the warning will be put into place for Jeju at least any time.
Yeah, places like Korea, such as Jeju and Busan, and areas in Kyushu, such as Kagoshima and Fukuoka, as well as Sasebo, should definitely stay on guard for possible typhoon sustained winds, and this it is unknown exactly where between those areas that the storm will track, but nonetheless we are expecting to see some typhoon force and possibly major typhoon force in some areas.
Well, I will say the track's probably a lot more clear now, though, because we're really less than 24 hours out from a landfall now. Even though the storm still looks pretty far away, those outer bands are already licking just near, actual mainland South Korea, and the storm should continue to accelerate in forward speed as it moves generally north-northeastward and then bends more towards the north in the next day or so.
And this is the biggest storm in our priority list right now. Code red on this, on our operations status. But Nana, not too far. Well, it's catching up slowly, but it's not the biggest feature out in the world right now. But we're watching everything. 3 systems that are affecting land areas.
Yeah, and I will say also with Maysak, and this is possibly going to be significant for High Shen as well, is that usually we don't see a train of typhoons at Category 3 equivalent at the latitude of Shanghai northward. towards Kyushu at this particular part of the world in the basin of the Western Pacific Ocean, because sea surface temperatures are usually around 25 to 26s and maybe some 27 degrees Celsius levels as we get up here. So you might have some really powerful storms come up this way and then begin to weaken, but you won't typically see storms trying to reach their zenith and peak in terms of intensity up here. I don't know if you have the sea surface temperature anomaly map,
Just
though,
a
but
moment. This is Tropical Storm High Shen right now as well. This is the latest imagery from the Himawari 8 satellite close-up, just off the northernmost Mariana Island chain. That's really getting itself sorted as well. Models really blowing that up.
yeah, I think
The
JTWC
structure is actually looking pretty good. There's some cloud tops in the satellite imagery, and I think I have a feeling that this storm might become a major typhoon by September 4th or the 5th, probably.
Well, I
What
mean,
are your guys' thoughts on this
right
storm?
now, it's forecast to peak on the 5th as a 120 knot storm by the JTWC. So that's 140 miles an hour sustained winds for people doing the conversions. From that point on, it's set to accelerate harshly towards the northwestward and weaken substantially in that time through a mix of less favorable conditions and land interaction with Japan from the current forecast. But it could still be a Category 2 equivalent storm just offshore of Busan as of the latest forecast. And, that really goes to, the really above average sea surface temperatures in between, I guess if you want to do a triangle between, southwestern Kyushu, Busan, and Shanghai, there's really 3 to 4 degrees Celsius anomalies still above average here, which
Here
is
it
pushing
is.
what would normally be around 25 to 27 degrees Celsius up towards 29 and 30 degrees Celsius.
This is quite remarkable. The trail of Bavi and Maysak so far has only cooled the Philippine Sea near the Ryukyu Islands to the 0 mark.
And what are the more specific? I don't even see almost any impacts yet, specifically where Masak is right now, because Bobby took a bit of a westward hook around here, and
The waters
I
are a
guess
little bit cooler than average off West and South Korea, but everywhere
Yeah.
else in the main tropical zone, the Western Pacific, is way above average, especially off the coast of Japan. So watch really closely for storms that might hold on to their intensity for longer.
I mean
Yeah,
that
it's looking. Oh, go on.
yeah, I mean that could be high fan.
Somebody in the chat just said that Haishen might become a Category 5 with winds of 175 miles per hour and a pressure of 887
You can never
millibars.
rule it out in
Never
this
rule it out,
basin.
but if it were to be 175 miles an hour, it would be hard pressed to get a pressure at least at that latitude really below 890. So I wouldn't say that's the most realistic expectation, but a forecast of 140 miles an hour in very favorable conditions, you can't technically rule out a Category 5 storm, but it's by no means the consensus forecast right now in general from models.
And this is the sea surface temperatures here, the actual temperatures now. Still in the Gulf after Laura, still around 28 degrees Celsius waters. The Western Gulf, 30 plus. Around Cuba, around southern Florida, 30 degrees plus. Off the Bahamas, 30 degrees. Off the Carolinas, 28 to 30 degrees. The Caribbean Sea, well, where Nana is right now, 29 degrees. The Western
Also in the
Pacific
Western
piping hot.
Pacific, it's looking pretty warm out there in the Western Pacific, 30 degrees plus. On the Japanese and Mariana Islands.
The 30-degree
degrees plus.
isotherm does extend up to the central Japanese coast, almost to Tokyo.
I will say something to watch as well with Haishen in the coming days. Even though Maysak is, of course, going to leave another larger, cooler tail behind it, between Sasebo and Busan, the anomalies there are still about 3 degrees Celsius above average, and that's where the storm isn't really going to directly track over. So if that holds and doesn't at least cool down too much, you're going to see a period where sea surface temperatures as Haishen moves past Kyushu could be well above average and allowed to try to hold on to its intensity a bit better than you would otherwise expect for that area. And that's probably why the JTWC is going so bullish for day 5, even after land interaction, and saying a 90 knot storm, which is 105 miles an hour sustained just off the coast of Busan at day 5 right now.
It is quite the forecast to see. I think the scariest part about that JTWC forecast is that there are multiple people that would consider it conservative, considering the conditions that we have out in the Western Pacific. I don't think model guidance is too keen on anything far above a 140 right now. There might be.
Strat's looking up the HWRF right now.
I see. But
we see they're actually higher than the HWRF, which is the highest one. They're also higher than the TWRF. I'll take a look at some of the specific models in a second too.
There's only 2 depicted on that chart.
Yeah, I'll take a look at the GFS in a second as well. And I don't think the H1's there, but they aren't bullish on the intensity at the time being.
Something to note when it comes to this is that the GEFS ensembles have an average pressure of 919 millibars in 4 days.
That is pretty astonishing.
It is pretty, yeah. There is not one ensemble member that shows it being above 930 millibars at peak.
Is this the latest GFS?
Yeah, this is the latest GFS, so this would be concerning because it does show 113 knot storm, so just shy of Category 4 intensity.
That's quite a bit of a downgrade from the previous runs, though.
Yeah, I haven't seen the previous runs today.
Well, runs this morning, weren't they? Running with 918.
Yeah,
I believe it was
929
17 millibars.
Yeah, I mean, that really shouldn't
that there is still, I should point out, that there is still a major typhoon landfall, and this is the GFS, which has been batting low quite a bit recently.
The GFS, though, does weaken down the maximum wind significantly more than the forecast in the JTWC. It has it making landfall or trying to skirt by the eastern coast of South Korea as a Category 1 equivalent typhoon with a very low pressure. It's saying a 74 knot storm with a minimum pressure of 955 millibars.
Yeah, that can happen.
Yeah, I mean, once you get to that latitude, we're closer to 40 degrees north here. That can actually happen, especially when we're talking about the Western Pacific. But the main threat right now, impacts past Japan really are significantly less clear just because when this thing really picks up its forward speed and the exact really turning motion of it at that point is going to matter a lot for potential impacts in South Korea. This run is well to the right of the JTWC consensus. When you get around to the day 5 point, it brings it to, those strongest winds actually offshore of South Korea. The JTWC right now would want them to try to plow straight into Busan. So the difference when it comes down...
But look at how enormous that cone is. So we know JTWC cones are big, but that at the end of the cone there, it's as big as Japan.
I want to see the JMA's track for this really quick. I'm going to see if I can pull this up too, because usually theirs are a bit smaller than the JTWC's. Let me see if I can get any of those up really quick.
We'll just watch Strat try and find his way around the internet.
No, don't stay on me right now.
All right, let's not. Let's take a look at more imagery of Nana. There it is right now. We'll open it up to the floor again. Any further thoughts on this storm right now?
This shows you a bigger spread of models than that HWRF site does. And you can see a few really concerning trends.
You're still on High Shen. We can do that.
Yes. Would you like to move on?
We'll come back to High Shen. I just wanted to get any thoughts on Nana right now.
Oh, well that's... Oh, no satellite's breaking. Okay,
a lot of people wondering why they would call a storm that, but...
I mean, we don't get to choose the naming list. It's people in charge to do that, I guess.
And this storm name was actually used for the first time in 1990, if I'm not mistaken.
Something like that.
And that was the first... 1990, 30 years ago, the first time the N name was used in an Atlantic season. Is that right?
Probably on this list.
Probably, yeah.
So...
I mean... it's kind of hard-pressed to say on Nana right now much other than noting its significant organization for a storm of its intensity this soon after designation. We're going to have a lot more information about its exact, current intensity and potential risks that it'll bring in terms of maximum winds, pretty shortly, that recon plane is probably at most an hour from getting a full pass of the center, and we'll definitely be able to get a full synopsis of the current conditions and intensity of the storm. I know people were trying to say earlier that it'll probably come out a little bit stronger, at least, than what we were seeing earlier. Based on what looks to be a pretty impressive CDO, that wouldn't surprise me to see. But we are having a potential hurricane threat for significant portions of Central America right now, depending on exactly where it makes landfall. Of course, tropical storm conditions and rainfall will extend significantly further from the center, and people should be keeping an eye out on those specifically as well.
So in the Atlantic, we have 2 storms active, Nana and Omar. And Omar formed earlier today. Both of them got their names today on, well, September the 1st. It is the 2nd now on the universal clock. But new records being formed all the time in this 2020 Atlantic hurricane season. Beat 2005 to the O name. When was Ophelia that year?
It was a week later than today.
A week later, so we're still a week ahead.
Did it beat for Nana, too? Was that the earliest end-name storm? I wasn't quite sure about that.
Yes, it was.
Okay, well, there's another one on the list, too.
Yeah.
And these happening today also invalidate the poll made a little over a day ago asking people how many named storms would happen in September. The 2% of people out of over 2,000 votes that said 0 to 1 storms
Wow.
have pulled out already.
That's
Oh,
a really
you're
special
wrong.
2%. Please make yourselves known.
Yeah, and as this other wave develops, I haven't seen the potential odds of development right now. It's 60% in the next 5 days on this wave emerging off of Africa right now.
One over there. Mhm.
That would get up to 3 for the month if that forms in the next 5 days in the first week of September. And that would also be, was it LMNOP? That would be the earliest P-name storm on
Weren't
record,
the
too.
1 or 2 models that have 5 simultaneous tropical cyclones in the Atlantic at some point?
I don't
that
want
was
to think
the
about that.
Aspara.
Was that any time soon, or was that way down the line?
I think it was hour 384.
Oh,
That's
okay. Well,
It's hearsay right now. But,
but
if that were to
honestly,
happen,
you look at this right now. There's a little blob over Haiti. There's some little bits of convection off near Barbados. There's another little area in the Central Atlantic. Another little area near Cape. This is the peak season that we're looking at, and even though we don't have 6 tropical storms, which is extremely rare if it's ever happened in the Atlantic, there are 2 and 4 other little areas there that would produce locally heavy rainfall and maybe some stronger winds, but not tropical cyclones. So that's the time of year for you in the tropics there, and this is what we're looking at.
yeah, and on top of that as well, not just that 60% in the next 5 days of that wave's moving off of Africa and should generally go to the west and west-northwest. But the other area that they kind of really writ off for a little bit, that's kind of just meandering for almost the next week around 40 degrees west and 10 degrees north, is back up to 30% odds of development in the next 5 days.
Yeah, I think it was
20%
silly for them
2 days.
to remove it when they did.
Yeah, I mean, the full support dissipated on it briefly, but I mean, they're back on it a little bit, just monitoring it, really. So you could potentially see 2 storms try to form relatively close to each other if that one really gets its act together. Although, notably though, I will say the western disturbance, which is, I'm pretty sure it's still disturbance 1, is at a low odd of development in the next 5 days overall. So it isn't particularly likely that one develops within the next 120 hours.
I think we pretty much answered Alex's question there, but if you do have any comments or questions for us whilst we're on the air for this hour-long live tropical weather bulletin, then start your message with Force 13 all in text. I imagine we'll get quite a flood now that I've said that. We'll do our best to respond. There were some from earlier. If the African wave forms before September 17th, then we are likely going to get the Greek names by late September to early October. Well, I do a little giggle on that, but you might be right, actually.
I hate to say that, but I think how much do we have left on the naming list right now? 6 total storms?
6 names.
Yeah, and we had 6 storms form in July and 5 in August, and we already have 2 this month. So if we get 6 this month, which isn't out of the question considering that would mean 4 more for the next 30 days, and we already have another medium area of interest, then it would be very hard-pressed, I'd say, to reach Greek names in September itself.
It would, yes.
But in October, if the current
Be a
trends
brave
continue,
person to bet on it happening in September.
We have another question. What are the chances that Laura is the strongest 2020 Atlantic storm?
Still
Definitely
low at
possible.
still low at this stage. Ask at the end of October, and I would say moderate to high.
Yeah, it's possible, but we still have a lot of time ahead of us in peak season. For all we know, the wave that's coming off right now, it's at 60%. Really develops into favorable conditions and becomes a very strong storm in the open, tropical Atlantic. And hopefully, if such a hypothetical would occur, it would stay completely away from land and curve out to sea. But we're still not even at the peak of the season yet, so it'd be hard pressed to say one storm that's already occurred will definitely be the strongest yet.
Well, there's a
I mean, the
question.
peak of the Atlantic season is September 10th, so...
Yeah. Are there any Greek names after Zeta? Yes, believe it or not, there are more than 6 letters in the Greek alphabet.
I believe there are 20 years.
I think it's 20 or 21 or something like that.
I believe there are 24.
Oh, even more then.
Yes, the next letter after Zeta would be Eta, and then
Yep.
after that you would have Theta,
Yep.
Iota, and Kappa.
But I really don't want to talk about that kind of thing yet because it's going to drive us nuts enough if we get that
Yeah.
far when it happens.
I will say I have this radar up right now from Grand Cayman. Isaac was very kind to share this with me. I will say, it doesn't capture the storm too well right now just because of its location. But with Jamaica, they're still getting some rainfall in association. It is kind of notable to say that Jamaica has gotten a lot of rainfall from 3 separate tropical cyclones in the past week and a half or so, and not been under a warning for any of them because of its location. Both Marco, Laura, and now Nana have brought significant rainfall totals to portions of Jamaica, despite them not even having any warnings. And that really goes to show that adverse conditions, extend far from the center of storms, and that even though strongest winds may not be in a certain area, it's very important to remember that rainfall is the biggest cause of loss of life with tropical cyclones. So even if you're not under a watch or warning, if you're potentially nearby an area that may be impacted, it's always good to stay up to date with the latest information on a storm from the sources that you have alongside your local weather office to see if you're projected to get elevated rainfall levels, because those can be dangerous.
And we are getting lots of questions here in the chat. We have one from Sammy. What if a Category 5 was a Greek letter?
Then a Category 5 is a Greek letter.
We have another one from Michael something. Is Nana going to be basically a weaker tropical cyclone than Iris back in 2001?
Size-wise, it's quite similar. You look at this, what this radar imagery does tell you, the limited information it's got there due to its proximity to the storm quite far, is how small it is, because if it was significantly larger, then you would see rain bands affecting the Cayman Islands. But I imagine that the coast of Honduras can't be too far further down than that screen allows.
I'll pull these up side by side.
There's Iris, okay.
Even though Iris formed sooner and was stronger sooner,
Yep.
relatively past Jamaica, it's not a bad analog at all in terms of track, at least.
I would still say it's a bit more of an Earl.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that too, and probably not as strong as well. So that would be correct to say. It'd be very hard pressed to see this ramp up to a Category 4 strength system in the 36 hours it really has left towards landfall right now.
Yeah, even in this crazy year that we're in, unless, well, it is in sort of the exact spot that Wilma did Wilma, though.
I think the difference
But
is,
so
though,
many other storms have been there too, you can't say things like that.
Yeah. I think
We
because
have another
of the fact
question
that it's going to
from
be
Alec
small.
V. Will Nana become a Category 2?
Yeah, good too.
A lot of it's going to come down to the
depends.
recon pass. If it
Yeah,
shows
where are
the
they? Are they nearly there?
They're entering
They
the
are-
periphery right now, so they're not there yet, but they
Recon
will
is
get there within the next 30 minutes to probably an hour at most.
Oh,
Still,
damn it.
if
Yes,
it shows
recon.
the system at near hurricane strength, then you could make an argument this could get to Category 2. But if it's only showing around 50 knots sustained winds at the surface, it'd be hard-pressed to say that it'll get to that intensity, especially when by tomorrow afternoon, it's a smaller storm, more prone to fluctuations and intrusions of dry air. Land interaction and ingestion of drier air could be an inhibitor, even though the general atmosphere over the core of the system will remain moist as it approaches landfall.
We always tend to be on air at the wrong time. We're going to miss the recon now.
We have another question from Elvin Gaming X. What are the chances that Nana reforms in the Eastern Pacific?
Ooh, there's a little chance of that.
That's a good question, actually.
Or I would say what's more likely is that its energy contributes to the formation of an East Pacific storm.
If you wanted a comparable in terms of the occurrence, it'd probably be Amanda, the remnants and energy of Amanda creating Cristobal in the Atlantic this year. But I don't think any models are particularly picking up on that at the moment, so it'd be more negligible.
I'm still not convinced that Cristobal was its own thing after Amanda.
Postseason analysis, who knows what they're going to say.
It's a really tough one. I've looked at satellite imagery multiple times, can't remember my mind upon that one. Anyway, you can see this imagery here. You can see how it is starting to draw closer to the Yucatan Peninsula. Belize on the far left-hand side of your screen there, the outline just about visible. Honduras near the bottom there as well. The convection associated with the storm creeping ashore from the peripherals of Nana, but the main blob of convection near the center, unless it's a jog south, Honduras should get away from anything major from this, but there could still be some heavy rainfall, and we know from experience how bad that can be for any of these areas in Central America.
It's pretty sad to see that this part of the world is really vulnerable to storms like this. Regarding recon earlier, I know that you guys were talking about recon. They're probably about 30 minutes to an hour away from getting into the core of the storm to get that crucial data that we need from this storm here. And I got radar here off of the Cayman Islands on the loop here, and you can see in the last few frames there may be the slight hint of perhaps an eye wall forming on that radar just looking at it.
Hold on. Here it is. Hard to tell.
Here, let me see if I could slow it down a little bit.
But
you can probably see
looking at the radar scope there, you would think that we think that the center of storm is there, then, isn't it? Yes, I know. I see what you're looking at now.
Mm-hmm. See, there might be some.
That would make sense.
There might be some rumblings that the eye is still, or at least if it became less defined earlier, it's trying to get its act together again. Keep in mind, this is a fairly small and compact storm, so these storms are capable of either intensifying at a quick rate of speed here, or at the same time as well, decreasing in speed and intensity just as fast here. So they're really uncertain in terms of intensity-wise with these tiny compact storms. Like I said, a good example of that was earlier this year with Tropical Storm Gonzalo. That was forecast to become a hurricane as it was heading for the Leeward Islands here, but fortunately weakened and died as it was going over there. So it just goes to show that storms like this one are really unpredictable in terms of intensity here. So just keep an eye on this storm really over the next coming hours if you're in these areas that are going to be impacted by this storm.
Something that is worth noting is that the ATCF has updated for 0Z
Oh.
and they have at 50 knots, 1,000 millibars.
Okay, so they've ATCF, the automated system, suggesting that Nana is up to 60 miles per hour. Well, we shall see when the National Hurricane Center do the next update, which will be at what time now? 11 p.m. Eastern Time.
I will say it wouldn't be surprising to see that actually verify through the recon data and then the full advisory, just based on a pretty solid CDO, and as Isaac was mentioning as well, potential fragments or portions of an eye wall coming into place at this point in time. definitely probably a bit better organized than earlier this morning, and that would likely result in likely stronger tropical storm force winds as well.
Yeah, the next National Hurricane Center update is at 11 p.m. Eastern time is when they're going to do the next full update on this, and of course by that time they should have reconnaissance data from this storm to say if the storm has continued to intensify here, if it's still kind of maintained its intensity here. We're just going to get that crucial data here in about 30 minutes to an hour time
Of course.
once the hurricane hunters get in there.
They'll also update Omar. And I know some people were saying that it should be killed off by now, but it is blowing a little bit of convection. As it stands right now, that is still a tropical storm.
Yeah, it might be trying its last attempts at trying to sustain itself here before it really gets blown apart by the wind shear.
Models a while ago were suggesting that the remnants of this, some of its energy, would go on to develop another tropical cyclone in the North Atlantic, further out to sea.
I really wouldn't enjoy that if that happened.
Could you imagine that? That'd be another name that just lasts for 24 hours or whatever as a tiny tropical storm. Just really building up the name list here.
Yeah, I think they're anticipating that's going to dissipate, though, at around day 5 right now, and then get absorbed by a trough or a larger system coming in as it pulls off to the northeast. So hopefully that doesn't happen. That'd be a nuisance if it did. But Isaac made a really good point about it, really trying to blow up the last bits of convection, trying to keep some energy over the center of it. That was also noted in the forecast discussion last night when it was designated as a depression, that instead of really trying to just die off immediately, that there was a suspicion that it would try to blow up kind of pulses of convection over its center for the next couple days and really try to keep it alive.
Hold on.
Recon has started their descent into Nana, by the way.
Okay, that's good news. I'm not sure if we'll have it in the next 12 minutes that we're on the air, but
I don't think so.
always the timing. Anyway, let's take another look at Shen. There it is once again. It's looking decent. Actually, let's take a look once again at Masak. So this storm, I mean, it's a contentious peak intensity. How strong does everyone here think it peaked at? Because there's been various numbers that's been thrown out.
When you say with this storm, do you mean Masak?
Yes.
I mean, it was looking mighty impressive yesterday. I'm pretty inclined to agree with the general consensus between 140 and 145 miles an hour based on the satellite appearance that it was holding at peak.
That's interesting because I looked at the imagery and it seemed to me as the peak happened before the JTWC had the peak.
Yeah, I mean, that looks like what's happening, just like how they're still saying right now, at least Cat 4 when much more disheveled and stuff. Sometimes they're a bit more of a laggard in terms of, the Western Pacific intensity changes, but, when you have update once every 6 hours still, even when there's watches and warnings in place, like they have to do, they only do position updates every 3 hours sometimes. You kind of get into a point where you can be a bit of a laggard, not by intention, but just by time frame.
It does look like that they'll be bringing it down to 120 miles an hour at the next update, though.
That seems fair, given how it looks right now. It's quoted a microwave at least. It's trying to form a really huge eye here.
Yeah.
But time remains to be seen if it tries to do it or not before affecting the Koreas here with time.
One thing that's guaranteed here, it's going to be a picturesque storm, photogenic, and there's still that. It's huge. It is literally an enormous band right now, wrapping round into that eye. And is that an enormous dry air slot?
Could be. I haven't looked at water vapor. I haven't looked at water vapor, but it wouldn't surprise me if it was one.
Let me take a look real quick as well. But
and there once again is Shen, and the ATCF information is suggesting that will be going up to 60 miles per hour from 50. So that one's on its way to typhoon status as well. And I think we're all agreed it will get there.
I mean, it'd be very difficult for it based on the environment laid out for it in the next 4 days before it really accelerates between days 4 and 5 and begins to have more land interaction, less favorable conditions, for it to not become a typhoon unless it completely botched itself.
Yeah, that's not likely.
But I guess when the basin is so empty for very large portions of the year, it gives the ability for these systems to try to really ramp up in intensity, not just because they're going to have warmer sea surface temperatures when they're around, but the the depth of those warmer waters goes down a lot further too than you might normally see in certain areas, just based on the complete lack of storms coming in to create upwelling.
Well, we've got 10 minutes left here, so keep any questions coming in. This might be the last chance. Start your message with Force 13 all in text. Here's some more questions and comments. Has the National Hurricane Center ever downgraded a storm in post-season report? They have never had... I don't want to say they've never had the guts because that sounds too rude. But they've never gone and done that.
Have they ever done it like 5 miles an hour with not a category change, though?
Maybe. They should have done it with Lorenzo, if you ask me.
Yeah, I believe I know we here at Force 13 have downgraded systems such as Matthew and of course Lorenzo, if you remember that last year.
And then we have this sticking point all the time, and you see the weather community, and there's a lot of arguments that happen about 5 miles an hour here and there, and you just think, does it really matter so much at the end of it all? And I get Devon's point when he talks about, we need a more relevant scale.
Yeah, I mean, the CDPS scale has honestly done great, and I really hope, that more organizations really take into consideration scales that are more based on broader points of cyclones than just wind speed, because the size of a storm matters a lot, and rainfall, of course, causes 90% of the deaths, rainfall and flooding. So honestly, I think there needs to be a lot more consideration along that regard. And that kind of actually goes to a question I just saw real quick as well from Maysak. Someone's asking, how large is Maysak from the north to south on it right now? I would assume that is
Large.
going to be at least 500 miles, if not larger, because it currently stretches from more the southwestern Ryukyu Islands all the way up towards just off the coast of mainland South Korea. So it is a massive storm north to south.
Let me get a little reference on that and see if I can bring an answer.
Get a full drawing on that really quick, but if you see the satellite imagery, not just visible, just see the clouds from it, but if you see
the working answer at the moment is big.
Yeah, I mean it's impacting further down south in Ryukyu Islands, Jeju, portions of South Korea already, and portions of Kyushu in Japan at all the same time, while not having its center several hundred miles displaced from basically all of them. So credit to its size on all quadrants, really.
All right.
Although,
using the most lenient definition, and that would be, everything that's associated with the storm, the spiral, the peripherals, about 1,200 miles. If you're talking about the main banding region, north to south, that's about 400 miles, which is still really significant. The eye itself, right now that it's trying to form, is, get this, 108 miles wide.
that would be one of the larger ones on record right now in the basin, wouldn't it be, if it tries to really come out all the way?
I think that might be probably in the top 5 in the last 5 years. Certainly big. What would that be? What, the top 1% maybe?
Yeah, I know. For recent example wise, I think some good ones would probably be Typhoon Crosa when it was getting up on those
that
cooler
was
sea temperatures.
huge.
It was a big typhoon, and then as well as Typhoon.
It was
I think
barely
it
an
was
eye.
Sulik.
It was enormous.
And Typhoon Sulik, I believe. I think it was in 2018. Had a really huge eye.
That was funny because it almost looked like the eye was devouring the rest of the storm. Really.
Yeah, that was huge. So there have been storms that have been big in the past before. It's not common to see that, but occasionally can happen, like you see with the Maysak here. And regardless of how picturesque or not this storm is, it's a storm to take seriously here because it has this large wind field here. And keep in mind, I know you were talking about hurricane scales earlier. Just because a storm is just a Category 2 or a Category 1 does not mean you don't have to take it seriously. Take a look at Hurricane Ike in 2008. That was a high in Category 2 and had a storm surge of up to 22 feet.
Don't
That was a
forget
really
Sandy.
large cat too.
Sandy
Yep,
wasn't even a
Sandy.
tropical storm when it made
And then you got Allison in 2001 as well. That was a really notable storm for its flooding as well too. So just goes to show, just because a storm may not be strong in terms of wind wise, does not mean you don't need to take a storm seriously here.
Yeah, that kind of, at least for the Western Pacific, I think the callback to that is 35W last year. I forget its exact name, but when it was a tropical depression, it was forecast to dump potentially up towards 30 inches
Was
of
that
rainfall
Usman?
into the Philippines. Yeah, it was Usman. You're right. Yeah, I mean that dumped torrential rainfall over portions of the Philippines, despite it being a tropical depression and tropical storm strength system. So, and if you want an analog for the Atlantic, Nate as a tropical depression, horrendous rainfall levels in Central America too. So, Isaac's completely correct.
We're about to finish up here. Looking back at the Atlantic map then, team, which areas are you looking at? After Nana, of course. What do you think is going to happen down there?
We're still getting some more questions in the chat in the Atlantic. Could Tropical Disturbance 2 off Africa could become a major threat to America?
I mean, that's just speculation right now, to be honest about it. I mean, we're asking about what we're looking on past Nana and Omar. It'd probably be that one more than anything else. 60% chance the next 5 days, and it'd probably be higher than that if you go out a bit further. But, I mean, if we're talking about a 60% odd of formation in the next 5 days, and the furthest out that goes is 40 degrees west, it'd probably be at least 2 weeks before any potential impacts in the mainland United States, if that were to occur. The amount of variance you could see in that time period is massive. So, if you're along the eastern coast or you're in the Gulf Coast concerned about it, just stay up to date with the developments on it. But it's way too soon to really specify any potential land impacts with it.
And we have another question about Hai Shen. Does Hai Shen have a Philippine name?
No, but it's expected to briefly enter the Philippine region, maybe just for a couple hours. So we'll see whether Pagasa take notice and give it a name.
And we have another question. Will African AOI go west-northwest and curve north, or would it curve west?
I tell you what models are suggesting in the longer range. They are expecting storms to just go west-northwest across the whole Atlantic, really. Areas that I'm looking at for middle to late September, there could be a battering for some areas. The US southeast, from Florida up to the Outer Banks, the Western Caribbean, those are two places that have been highlighted for hotspots later on in this month. So that's something to watch closely. Not set in stone, but that's the indications that we're getting from long-range models, and climatology would suit it as well.
Yeah, I am, specifically the climatology on that as well. You can't really pin down anything specific with, a specific AOI, for example, but, the general, consensus for, the Bermuda high is that it's going to remain very dominant and just push a lot of these storms further west. So there is, the potential to have less storms escaping out to sea that form, further east in the main development region, and try to have them push towards land areas in the Caribbean, or the southeastern United States. But, that's, more mid-range to long-range right now. I can't really pin that down on a specific area of interest, other than to say, pay attention.
Some late questions there. Why is South Korea keep getting hit by hurricanes, typhoons in this instance? It's just that kind of year, I think. The pattern is set up for those areas. Usually it's the Philippines. Do you think Omar might reach Nova Scotia? No, it won't. Can New York City get a hurricane? Of course it can, but not just yet. That's about it, really. We're gonna.
And we actually have one more question. Laura was with the cold front when it got off the East Coast, so did some of Laura's energy help create Omar?
I would personally say yes. I don't know for sure, but my guess right now, having not looked at all the data just yet, would be yes.
The European was right in a way.
I think that pretty much wraps it up, really.
Well, thank you to the entire team once again tonight on this live tropical weather bulletin. There'll be plenty of updates online on our, of course, on our social media platforms, Facebook and Twitter. Follow Force 13, and you can contact us by email, contact@force13.com, or you can chat in our live Discord server, which is quite a hub these days, discord.gg/force13. And of course, we'll have plenty more videos on the channel in due course. Thanks for watching. We'll be back again probably before you know it.